Many of you know Mike Tucker from his days as dealer owner of George Allen out of Maryland for many years. Mike is the CEO now of the National Office Products Alliance, NOPA. In this session, Mike will provide details of successful challenges on multiple fronts fought and won against the e-commerce giant Amazon. Mike will also provide an update on recent developments at GSA and the positive impact that this will have on the independent dealer and manufacturer. So back by popular demand, let's welcome Mike Tucker.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience, but it's great to be back here with you again this year. Last year I talked quite a bit about the General Services Administration and how to get a GSA schedule and things about contracts and the size of the federal market and so forth. And we're going to cover a little bit of that at the end of this presentation, but mostly this is going to be about Amazon. Did any of you attend any of my previous Amazon presentations, either the Invisible Man or the Emperor Has No Clothes? So, okay. The Emperor Has No Clothes was, I'll have to show you that costume sometime. I even enjoyed that. Okay. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to do a little brief recap of some of the things I covered last year about some of what's been going on with Amazon. We're going to talk quite a bit about some interesting facts about the second headquarters that Amazon just awarded and is in the process of doing in Arlington, Virginia. We're going to cover in some detail some of the legal problems that Amazon is experiencing these days. And there's a lot of them, and they're quite varied. I'm going to speed up the part about counterfeit and gray market because I think we've covered a lot of that in the previous presentation, so that's quite all right. We're also going to talk about some of the things that's going on in the federal government agencies, the FTC, GSA, the Justice Department, lots of things going on with people starting to deal with the problems that the marketplaces are having. And then, like I said, a short thing at the end talking about some developments that are happening with the GSA Schedules program that are going to impact anybody and everybody that has a GSA contract or wants to get one. So Amazon, no surprises here. The growth is still tremendous, and their stock is doing well, and about a $50 billion increase year over year, 2018 to 2017. The tactics that they continue to use to grow their business are very much based on the targeting or using pricing as a weapon. They don't just offer sale pricing or do things to try and compete with other people. They try and take over markets and product categories and things with their pricing tactics and are quite ruthless in the ways that they do that. You have a thing called the Amazon Flywheel, and that talks about how Amazon weaponizes the data that they're able to get from the products that they sell, the companies that are selling, the brands, and then using that to find either ways to buy those companies, to come up with other products that they can sell more profitably, but in no way trying to be some type of a partner with their suppliers, always using things to their advantage and against their suppliers and supposed partners. And then they continue to expand into manufacturing. So the more of the products that they're getting into, they're either buying companies or taking over companies to be able to privatize those brands. And this was a slide from last year, and I think there was one up there earlier, but just hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of different brands. And you're a customer shopping on Amazon, and you think that that's a small private company that makes whatever it is, and really it's just Amazon using that as a private label, but they're so varied and they're not all red, so it's kind of hard to tell. Something a lot of people in our industry don't pay too much attention to, but Amazon Web Services, their public cloud computing thing, they actually control 1/3 of the world's public cloud computing. They're bigger than Microsoft, IBM, and Google combined. So that's a big, big number. And they are very interested, like with other things, in getting into the federal space with this. They currently hold a contract with the CIA that's worth over $600 million, but they have been working diligently for the last couple years to close a deal with the Department of Defense called JEDI, not to be confused with the Office Depot Program Federation. But JEDI, Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, is a $10 billion contract, so this is quite a large endeavor. And a request for proposal was issued back in 2017, but Amazon had a tremendous amount of influence in putting that proposal together, much like what happened with the U.S. Communities contract in our space. And that contract, only the two companies, Microsoft and Amazon, had any chance of even competing on it. So in comes Oracle, who decided they didn't like what was going and had done some investigations and were able to cause some significant delays on this whole process. And a lot of it boiled down to what was going on with a conflict of interest by 3 DoD employees who basically were moles for Amazon and were involved in putting the proposal together, reviewing the back and forth transactions and dialogue that was going on. And none of those 3 people even work for the Department of Defense anymore. Either one or all of them work for Amazon. So anyhow, that still has not been awarded, and the future of it is even more in question because our president has also announced that he's going to get an investigation starting on what was going on and to improprieties in the business and the bidding process. But a lot of people are very concerned seeing that much sensitive data in the hands of Amazon, and I don't blame anybody for that. Last year we talked about the big initiative for 2018, which was the Whole Foods acquisition that Amazon did. This year the big one was the second headquarters for Amazon. And so they basically started a big lottery, a big contest to see who could score the second headquarters for Amazon. And they ended up getting a lot of proposals from cities and states all over the country. And by doing that, we're able to score a lot of data on land use and development things that were going on across the country and things that not only would help them with this headquarters, but any other types of expansion or development they were looking to get into. The city of New York alone provided a 253-page proposal. That's a pretty big term paper there. A lot of the data that was in there was public data, but a lot of it was not. It was a lot of things that had to do with land use and education and current and future development projects and other things that anybody that's going to be expanding and doing new development would certainly love to have their hands on. But not only did they get one of those from New York City, they got those from 238 other cities. So across the country, they now have a roadmap or a playbook that they can use pretty much anywhere, anytime they want, and didn't cost them a thing. Ultimately, the final decision for the headquarters was Arlington or Pentagon City, Virginia. For any of those familiar with the Washington, D.C. area, you have the Pentagon, you have National Airport there, so that area in between there is kind of where we're talking about. And it used to be an old railroad area, and it's along the Potomac River, and it has a great view of the airport, and it's a pretty neat thing once you get when it gets cleaned up and you have a nice building on it. But anyhow, everybody thought that this, headquarters 2 was going to be about who could open their wallet up and give the biggest concession to Amazon. And that turned out not to be the case at all. So Virginia, which was one of the lowest bidders at $573 million, got the bid. Yet New York City, $1.5 billion, New Jersey, $7 billion, and my state, I'm so proud, Maryland, $8.5 billion. So as a Maryland resident, I'm quite thrilled that we didn't get that location, because I'm sure I'd be paying for it for quite a few years if I was lucky enough to stay in Maryland. Amazon is promising 25,000 high-paying tech jobs with an average salary of $150,000. They're going to develop over 4 million square feet of real estate in this market. They're actually going to rename part of that area in there. Is going to be called National Landing, so they're creating their own little town there. And if you were a homeowner in Arlington, Virginia, that was getting ready to move, you were pretty thrilled because you got almost immediately an 11% increase in the value of your property. And there's been a lot of speculators and other developers in there trying to buy up things and get the opportunity to build things that they can profit from. Amazon says that the basis for this decision was access to talent. The fact that you have 3 big airports, all quite close, and one very, very close, you can almost ride a bike to. And the overall business climate, Washington, D.C. is booming, one of the top 5 cities in the country in terms of successful business climate. But really, what it boils down to is there's not a better place in the country where they could develop more valuable future relationships than they could in Washington, especially with their proximity to the federal government and all the tech companies and supporting organizations that are supporting the federal government now. So they want their employees being the neighbors of all these people and on the same little league teams and going to the cookouts and all that stuff. So they're leveraging that, or hope to leverage that in Washington, D.C. And they've already off to a pretty good start of that with their lobbying effort. This is interesting because part of the reason Virginia got this contract was the guy who was the business development guy for Virginia happened to have read this book, The Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti. And this guy is a University of California, Berkeley economics professor. And he did some research and actually published a book about what was going on in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley with technology. And why were startup firms and tech companies still flocking into that area, even though the wages were very high and the cost of having a business there, expensive real estate. So, why are you guys still doing that? And cities, and I'm sure Jennifer's happy Minneapolis is on this list, but San Francisco, Raleigh, Boston, a lot of the cities have now become what they consider, education centers or targeted knowledge centers where they value the education and the workforce talent in those markets as more of a resource than a lot of the other things that you would normally look at if you were going to locate a business. So the whole proposal that Virginia put together was based on, providing information and feedback to Amazon that showed how they were going to fulfill these types of needs more so than the financial concessions a lot of the other bidders were looking at. New York, not so smart on that. It seemed like they were going to get an award, but that eventually fell apart, basically because neither party really needed the other. New York didn't need another corporate headquarters, especially if it was going to cost them $3 billion. And Amazon didn't need to locate 25,000 employees in Long Island City, which isn't really in New York, it's a borough. And, there were lots of complications with, back and forth to the city and all that. So, and then the political support was not there either. You had the mayor and the governor of New York who were big fans of this whole thing and really trying to push that along, and it looks like they had almost gotten it done, but when the rubber hit the road and people started seeing what the cost of it was going to be, the local politicians and congressmen and senators pulled back on it. And of course it didn't have the support of unions because New York's a big union market and Amazon doesn't like to play that game. So anyhow, that blew up, but as we said earlier, Amazon still has a 253-page report that if they ever decide they want to revisit the situation, they'll know exactly what to say and who to talk to. Now we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about Amazon's legal problems. And those problems start at the top. Jeff Bezos sues the National Enquirer over nude photos. That's I only got the headshot in that, so okay. A lot of the initial problems that Amazon is dealing with have to do with violations of employment law. They seem to have a policy of taking full-time employees and trying to recategorize them as independent contractors. And as a result, they get in a lot of trouble, or are getting in a lot of trouble with local governments and things to do with the IRS, because you can't do that. As we know, there are things, if somebody works full-time, you have to provide benefits, you have to pay them a certain wage and do things that are by the book. And Amazon's not doing a very good job of that, and they're paying the price for that in the courts right now. eBay is filing a lawsuit against Amazon. And this is interesting. This is kind of a corporate espionage thing, if you will. So Amazon instructed their employees, some of them, to create fake eBay accounts. And the reason they did this was so that they could get access to eBay's internal messaging system that they used to communicate with their resellers. And then Amazon used that platform to contact resellers and try and recruit them to be on the Amazon platform. Well, it didn't take eBay too long to figure out what had happened, so there's a huge lawsuit that's involved in that. But the thing that just shows you how, unethical, how ruthless, whatever, is, the size of Amazon, $887 billion, and they got nothing better to do than pick on a competitor that doesn't even account for 5% of the business that they have. So there's no limits to how far down they will go. And then this, not such a big one, but there's a lot of legal things going on with people getting charged for Prime memberships that they either didn't want or thought they had canceled, and being charged and recharged. So there's a lot of those smaller type things that continue to bother them. Too bad. I really like this one. So there's a lot of boutique law firms that are starting to pop up now that want to get in the game of suing Amazon. And I'm going to say this one must be pretty successful. AmazonSellersLawyer.com. They promise to help you if you've been suspended by Amazon, get your account and your listings back. And you see they have about 6 locations listed across the bottom there. Well, those aren't just 6 cities in the United States. Those are in 6 countries. So this is a pretty big firm. They're worldwide with offices all over the world. And then they also are publishing a lot of books that you see across the bottom there. So you have, if you want to do copyright law or trademark law or Amazon suspensions, or if you're in the fashion industry. So I looked that up probably, a few months ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't published, if they might start a whole library of books about how to sue Amazon. So stay tuned. But the collective effect of these lawsuits, is any one or two of these lawsuits going to bring Amazon down? Absolutely not. But hopefully enough of them will slow them down and keep them busy and have kind of a Gulliver effect for us. I really like this picture, and I thought this story was kind of entertaining. So this is about a guy that bought a replacement battery for his laptop, and naturally he got a counterfeit. So the battery actually exploded in his laptop, and if you can imagine battery cells flying all over his living room leaking acid, well, that's what's happening. So it burned his couch, his computer, his hardwood floor, and last but not least, his girlfriend. And so at the end of the day, did Amazon care? Nah, not really. They wouldn't put him in touch with the customer or the seller that sold it to him, and they assume no blame themselves. But that's changing, and that's changing very quickly. And hot off the press, there was a lawsuit, some of you may have read about this, about 2 months ago, that was a landmark suit, in that it was the first time that Amazon was held responsible by the courts for a reseller selling a counterfeit or a bad product that damaged a consumer. So this was the 3rd U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that did this lawsuit, but this is a landmark thing. So this opens the floodgates for all these consumers to, when they can't get in touch with the actual reseller or manufacturer of the product, now Amazon has some responsibility, some skin in the game. But a lot of what this has to do with is platform control. because the evidence just continues to build that Amazon and other tech giants either have lost control or don't want to control these massive platforms. So that, in addition to the size of the counterfeit problem and all the money that's involved in this, is what's getting the lawmakers and the courts involved and challenging the interpretations and the things that Amazon is using to try and protect. And I thought this was interesting because there's a law called the Communication Decency Act, which is actually the basis for what all these internet resellers are using to claim immunity. But the law was written 23 years ago, and supposedly the internet started about 1990, they say, give or take. And so, this is almost like at the dawn of the internet. So it's 23 years ago, nothing looked quite like it does today, for sure, not even close. So there's a big push now to start to analyze these laws and make necessary changes. The courts are also involved in this, saying that Amazon can be considered a seller because they don't have any type of a vetting process that actually gives the customer access, to the resellers and makes them available to be sued or held responsible for anything that they've sold that is bad. And then because Amazon has so much control over third-party sellers, it's no problem for them to prevent this if they truly, were intent on doing that, because they actually have no problem keeping counterfeiters out of selling their private label brands. So how is it that they don't have any ability to stop or enforce what's going on with the real branded products? This is probably going to go a little fast through this part because we already talked about counterfeit quite a bit, but it does affect the shareholders, brand owners, consumers. It's quickly becoming a $1 trillion criminal enterprise on a worldwide basis. And that's the reason that the government and the courts are so aggressively pursuing these things now. I just like this slide, whack-a-mole. You guys like that game? But Amazon in the beginning was acting a lot like the big boxes in that they could control their supply and distribution chain. And the products that they were buying and selling, they came from known partners and didn't have the problems. But as the marketplace grew, there became no way to effectively vet and police these resellers. And I understand there's about 2.5 million resellers on the platform now. So that's a big number, and because of that, when somebody gets kicked off for, especially somebody that's, a counterfeiter from China, they get dropped off, they can open up a new account in a matter of days and they're back in business, and a lot of times selling the same products. But, and as a result, not only are you getting counterfeit, but it's turning into a giant disaster zone because a lot of these products are unsafe and high risk and not properly labeled. So you have a lot of issues there that are really being brought to light now. How many of you saw the Wall Street Journal study that was out? Just one or two? Okay, well, this was interesting. This is very recent current news where from May to August, Wall Street Journal hired some certified testing companies, and they bought in the neighborhood of 5,000 products and had them shipped in and analyzed by this testing company. And the results were just amazing. 116 products falsely listed as FDA approved, 52 listings for supplements that had substances banned by the FDA and illegal prescription drugs, 1,400 electronic products that falsely claiming UL certification. So, these are the kind of things that are pouring into our homes, not just Gucci belts, which you probably couldn't hurt yourself too much on, but lots of other stuff, and lots of toy products came in on this. So stuff that, small children are, being exposed to. I didn't put any, I had a slide on it, but things like small magnets. There's, these magnets that string together and stuff, kids eat them. And, there's a lot of stuff going on with making sure those are kept off the internet and warning labels and all that. And Amazon is not playing ball with that at all. Chinese resellers, who can blame the counterfeiters? So they ship something, they still get paid by Amazon. They remain anonymous because Amazon doesn't expose them or give them up. So that means the customer has no legal recourse. And then I thought this was interesting. Not only after they've delisted the product, you would think they would get rid of it. A lot of times they ship the product back to the counterfeiter, so they get their stuff back. What's wrong with that? Okay, talked about a little bit of this in the last presentation, but the way these counterfeiters are doing things now, it's gotten so sophisticated. I mean, it's even hard for the brand owners sometimes to differentiate. The picture that the Bill showed on the last thing, was quite good example, but the photography and the artwork and the pictures and the things that they use on the packaging and the invoices and all the rest of it is totally authentic looking, and they've got it down to a science. But so it's no surprise that the brand owners right away are the ones that are blamed for the product not working right, because the end user can't tell that they've gotten a counterfeit until it gets explained to them or turned out through some investigation. But ultimately it creates all kinds of warranty problems and other issues that the brand owner has to deal with. Gray market, black market, similar product. As most people in this room know, this is a particularly big problem with the toner industry, the ink industry. Steve Noyes and I and Paula are working with a group up in New York that we have HP and Lexmark and Xerox and Clover are all part of a group that has been watching what goes on to this. But products that are sold and shipped out of the country and intended for other markets and at lower prices often just get turned around on another boat and come right back into the country, and people find ways to get them into the marketplace, especially through the internet and the resellers that are out there. So it ends up being something that's very difficult to police, not only for the manufacturer, but you have very little recourse because of a thing called the first sale doctrine. So trying to go after the reseller, they actually are a reseller can sell even though it's gone out of the country, if it's an unchanged state and a genuine product, they can resell it. It doesn't kind of matter how it got back in. So it's up to the brand owner to try and police that. But ultimately, this is something that the marketplace could certainly have some impact on, and Amazon and the other big tech companies, but they choose not to do that, and they blow us all a kiss and say good luck. This was an interesting story. I got 2 or 3 examples here of lawsuits that have been filed. One was by this small company that made a headphone storage unit called the Anchor. And Amazon, like I said, uses pricing and tactics to target companies. Well, they target this company, and I don't know if it was to teach them a lesson or try and get them to sell or what it was, but they took all of this company's sales for a 5-day period and rerouted them to a counterfeiter, just like that. And so they lost their sales for 5 days. It wasn't too hard to tell that the company they were routing it to was not from around here. If you can see the name of that seller, I'll give somebody $10 if they can pronounce that one. We may have a contest in the bar tonight. But anyhow, the product was made from poorer materials. Instead of a good quality 3M adhesive on it, it had a crap adhesive. It wouldn't stay. Anyhow, it was a poor thing. But the opportunity for this company to get recourse with Amazon was slim and none. But now, based on some of the court rulings, they're starting to get more of a voice. Big companies are suing them too. The Daimler AG, who's the parent company of Mercedes, is also fed up with what's been going on. They're not trying to sell counterfeit cars on the internet right now. Maybe that's going to come one day. But a lot of the things that Mercedes customers buy, whether it's a cracked hubcap or a hood ornament or things that go on your dashboard inside the car, those are usually quality resale products if you buy them from Mercedes, but there's all these little plastic things that look like they should be in the dollar store that have made their way onto the Amazon site. And so, Daimler's had it with Amazon, so they're filing an international lawsuit on a bunch of different bases there. So it'll be interesting to see how much that ends up costing Amazon. Williams-Sonoma, this is the last example I have here. They're a houseware company and been around for a long time and have been very successful and proactive in selling on the internet. Started their first online storefront in 1999. 50% of the company's sales come through that website, and they do not allow anybody else to sell their products on another website. So you can't license their name or trademark in connection with any other type of online service. But somehow Amazon has been able to list Williams-Sonoma products and as not only by the brand itself, but as being sold by Williams-Sonoma on the website, and even has a section on their website for best-selling products from Williams-Sonoma. So Amazon's had enough with this, and they basically filed a lawsuit that is $2 million per item that has been listed on the Amazon website, plus court costs and legal fees. So I'm real excited to see how that one's going to play out and whether they get anywhere near the settlement that potentially could be. Okay, now we're going to talk about Amazon's campaign to capture government. And it's a little shady. So how much is Amazon spending on lobbyists these days? About $14.2 million a year, up from $1 million a year in 2000. So it's been a progressive climb, almost directly in line with their sales there. But in terms of the overall amount of lobbying dollars spent in Washington, not as big as Google. Google's spending 21. And the statistic that I saw was that the big tech companies since 2005 have spent over $500 million lobbying our elected officials. So it's not just Amazon, but all the big tech companies are heavily in there trying to get what they want. But lots going on with the feds now. So congressional hearings, antitrust things, FTC investigations. Talk a little bit about that. Recently, in the middle of July, there was a committee hearing by the Antitrust Subcommittee. This is chaired by a congressman from Rhode Island, David Cicilline. Very interesting hearing. They had two panels. They had one panel that was made up of all the big tech companies. So it had Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple, and their officials there, and they heard them. But the purpose of this was to talk to them and ask them questions about how their platforms were impacting entrepreneurship and innovation and the marketplace in general and small businesses. And then the other part of the thing was some leading policy experts who were talking about, what needed to be done to protect competition, how these platforms were affecting communities and local markets and things like that. Our lobbyist, who some of you know, Paul Miller, actually attended this hearing, and he was very impressed with the way the congressional members handled this. He said they were very prepared, they had very tough questions, they were really trying to, get these guys to admit what they were doing or explain if they understood what they were doing, but they weren't getting very good answers back. And to the point where a lot of the questions, when they were asked if they were getting a BS answer back, they were reminding these people that they were testifying under oath, and there could be some accountability there if they were lying or making stuff up. Anyhow, they learned or didn't learn enough to know that they definitely are going to have another hearing and have them in front of them again. We were represented there by a lady named Stacey Mitchell, who some of you have either heard if you've come to our Advocacy Fly-Ins. She's been one of our speakers the last 2 years. She works for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which is a small think tank that advocates for independent businesses and small companies. They do research surveys and studies. They are written up and done a lot of things that's published in the Wall Street Journal and online, and they testify before Congress on a regular basis. Anyhow, she did a fantastic job of talking about not only how the marketplaces are hurting our industry, but other industries, because She's also runs a group we belong to called Advocates for Independent Business that includes other associations like the Running Shoes Association, the Booksellers Association, the Toy Sellers. So there's some big groups there that have, over 10,000 members. And so we felt very good that, she was invited to participate in this and did a great job. And if any of you would like a copy of her testimony, we have that available on the NOPA website. You're more than welcome to see that. Federal Trade Commission is getting into the act. They're the agency that's supposed to be protecting us as consumers and trying to railroad anti-competitive business practices and monopolies and things that are bad for our country and our economy. And they've been very active in the last year, not in a formal hearing yet, as of yet, but doing a lot of market research and meeting and talking with resellers that are using these marketplaces and talking to them about how the pricing structure works and how this whole thing where Amazon is competing against you as a reseller at the same time that you're working for them on the platform and other types of anti-competitive conduct. But ultimately, this is supposed to be the beginning of a much larger investigation that the FTC is getting ready to roll out. And also last fall, we were one of 7 trade associations that submitted a letter to the FTC as part of this investigation initially, talking about how the platforms were impacting our industry and our dealers. And the last time, ironically, this was done was 23 years ago, which coincides with that law we talked about that they're using as a basis to defend themselves from liability and from their resellers. Our country's not the only one that's gotten in the act of getting after Amazon. The European Commission, which is the equivalent of the FTC, is also involved in this now. And they've started a major investigation and lawsuit looking into what's going on with Amazon's use of third-party resellers and the whole thing with the dual role of being a retailer and a platform. Excuse me, hold her. Just one sec. Okay. But this is a big case, and they really got the guns out on Amazon on this, because if Amazon's found guilty of this, the fine for this could ultimately be $23 billion, which is 10% of Amazon's 2018 gross revenue. So that's another one I'm cheering for and hope to, hopefully it'll be settled before I pass away. Okay, our president is also in on the act here. He's introduced a memorandum to look into what's going on with counterfeiting and pirated goods. And he has commissioned a group to do a report that's due in 210 days. So it was started about a month and a half ago, so very soon. But the report is to look into the whole third-party thing and to try and discover ways that, besides what's going on at the border, that we can effectively combat what's going on with these pirated and counterfeit products, and ultimately to identify possible regulatory changes that can be made to effectively deal with the problem. How many of you guys have heard about the Defense Authorization Act and what's going on with the marketplace? Okay, not too many. Anyhow, this was a thing that started a little over 2 years ago, where Amazon actually hired a woman who used to be the head of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Her name was Ann Rung, and they brought her in as an insider for Amazon. And she was a political appointee in the federal government in their procurement arena. So she was able to lobby Congress and get them to vote on a law that would allow for a national federal marketplace that would replace the current marketplace and contract that existed in the federal government at the time. And this was introduced by a congressman named Thornberry from Texas. under the Defense Authorization Act. The defense bill is the one bill that Congress has to pass every year. They can't kick that down the road. They can't extend it. They can't play games with it. It has to be passed. And it's kind of a dirty trick because people try and stick things on that bill that really have nothing to do with defense, and this is a perfect example of that. So they tried to sneak this into the bill, but fortunately our association and several others found out about it, and we were able to get the language modified on it so that it wasn't an easy play for Amazon. It ended up being something that had to be done over a phased-in plan with input from industries, not just ours, and with review and oversight from GSA and the Office of Management and Budget. So that was 2 years ago. But this is a big opportunity. So if this thing passes, and it passes in a way that our industry and other industries can participate in it meaningfully, this is an opportunity to get into the federal government without a lot of the aggravation and things that keep a lot of people out of it. Because you're looking at a $5 billion estimated annual spend, so that's a lot of cheese there that we'd all like to have a shot at. But you don't have to hold a GSA contract, you don't have to negotiate your pricing. All you have to do is team up with a portal provider that has been approved by this thing. But I don't think many in this room, and especially in the dealer community, are interested in doing it if they have to partner with Amazon on it, because any that have learned it hasn't been worth it, and paying their fees and still trying to be competitive in the space is pretty much impossible. But the orders under this, the reason they're not subject to federal procurement regulations is because GSA has a thing called the micro purchase threshold, and they created kind of a little environment there of anything under $10,000 per order didn't have to go through the normal procurement regulations. So it creates a situation where you can sell products that might be from China or some other unapproved country. You don't have to sell the products made by the blind industries, and you don't have to. So this is the kind of thing you could piggyback off of a portal provider that's approved for this. And you could just be running around the government agencies and say, hey, I'm part of this. Do you want to buy from me? I'm local. You could tell your story, and you wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the things that a lot of the government resellers, which I was one of for about 25 years. So trust me, I know how much the pain is. NOPA's been very active in this. So for the last 2 years, we've done multiple presentations to GSA, talking first of all about the capabilities of our industry, our independent dealers, our partnership with our wholesalers, and how we're able to service nearly 100% of the country on a next day delivery basis with competitive pricing and service and a secure supply chain. We were using as a technology solution the Epic Business Essentials platform that ISG and Trimega have been using for quite a few years now. That's a proven and successful platform in the federal government space right now, and it could be expanded and used in the way that would benefit the government and our industry. We attended multiple industry days and listened to all that. Responses to RFIs. I thought when I sold my business I wouldn't have to do that anymore, but turns out I was wrong. But anyhow, it was well worth it because there was a lot of important data and questions that needed to be answered with this, and so we worked hard to make sure that was done properly. But ultimately, where we stand now is they have issued a draft request for proposal that is supposed to be turned into a real request for proposal at the end of the fiscal year, which ends at the end of this month. And unfortunately, after all the things that we talked about and advocated for, not just our industry, but other industries, in fact, the majority of industries, I don't know anybody that's really agrees with GSA's assessment of this so far, but they are saying they're only going to accept an Amazon-type marketplace for a proof of concept that they want to do that will be issued for 2 to 5 years. Fortunately, and this was a function of, I mentioned that we do an Advocacy Fly-In every year. this past spring, we had 75 dealers and manufacturers and others come in that are part of the association. And I'll talk about it in more detail, but we actually lobbied on Capitol Hill to get somebody to add an amendment to this defense authorization bill saying that if a portal solicitation comes out, they can't just test one portal, they have to test all 3 types of portals that were identified, which that means that our portal would indeed be included in a proof of concept. So we got a congresswoman from Texas, Congressman Escobar, introduced this thing in the House of Representatives. It was passed, but what we're waiting for now, Congress gets back in session next week, and we're waiting for the final bill to be passed. So there has to be a reconciliation where the Senate goes along with but Paul Miller is regularly monitoring this. We feel very hopeful that this will happen, but if we get that will really open the door for our dealers and our industry to participate in this new marketplace. But if the worst case scenario happens, we also have people teamed up to file protests and legal challenges to the RFP, and we think we have a very good case to do things that'll hopefully change GSA's mind if we can't get that bill passed in the House. The other thing we did, we created a group of other people from other industries and government that are working with us on this called the 846 Commission, or Coalition, I'm sorry. But we're going to continue to lobby GSA and other agencies about what's going on with this platform. And, so within our industry, we have the buying groups, we have a few independent dealers, but we also have the Industries for the Blind, we have the Federation for the Blind, 2 fairly big quite big government groups that have a lot of clout on Capitol Hill. We actually have Home Depot is in our group. We have an association, a healthcare association that is working with us. So Paul Miller is kind of monitoring and leading this coalition, but we have some other people that are helping us advocate for this. So a lot of work going in this to try and make sure that our concerns as an industry are heard. Okay, and this is a wild card. Why do I have a wild card on here? Basically because with this proof of concept in this new marketplace, we didn't really think there was anybody besides Amazon that might be able to play with in this space. But with the thing with Office Depot partnering with Alibaba, all of a sudden, Office Depot is a strong government reseller. And if they were able to have access to Alibaba and be able to put a proposal together to compete with Amazon, that could be a wild card in this whole thing, which I hope doesn't pop up. Okay, now we're going to shift gears, and this is going to be real exciting. This is GSA contract stuff. So I'll keep it simple and at a high level here, but GSA has been working very hard this past year. They have a new administrator, and they identified a lot of things that they wanted to try and change and approve at GSA. One of these things we just talked about, and that commercial platforms, that's what we're talking about with the marketplace that I just talked about with GSA and the Defense Authorization Act and all that. So we've already covered that. The square to the right of that, contract acquisition life cycle, that's a lot of technical stuff that goes into the contract writing and all. That's certainly not something this crowd would be interested in. But we are going to talk a little bit about the changes to the multiple award schedule and catalog management, because that affects contract holders that are your dealers, and some of you as manufacturers do hold your own contracts as well. But the current schedules program that is out there are 24 different schedules for different categories of product. And so as a dealer myself, I had 4 different GSA contracts. So I had one for furniture, I had one for office supplies, I had one for Jansan, I also had one for copiers. But they were 4 separate contracts, and I had a different contracting officer, I had to report the sales differently. There was a big duplication of effort that went into that process. So and then if an agency wanted to buy a copier and pallet of copy paper and a case or two of cleaning products or something. Those were all different contracts, and it got confusing to deal with. Not just for us, but for the government customer as well. So the goal of this thing is to consolidate this thing, get rid of some redundancy, and come up with a process that's easier for small businesses, easier for the administrative workers within GSA, and ultimately easier for the federal customers. So over the next 2 years, what's going to be happening, they're going to be migrating to this new platform. So instead of being 24 different contracts, there'll be one contract. So I could put my copiers, I could put my office supplies, my Jan-San, my furniture on that one contract and make them available to sell, and only have to deal with one contracting officer. And so it really simplified the process. So that's going to be happening over the next 2 years. Initially, if you already hold GSA contracts, you won't have to do anything. They'll just be doing some modifications and a lot of technical stuff that doesn't really impact your ability to call on your customers and sell products. But over the course of the next year, what they're going to start doing is, if you want to put a new product or get a new GSA contract, you're going to have to be part of this new program. But it's designed to be a simpler, easier to use, but that always scares me. If the government's trying to make it simpler and easier, is that really going to happen? It's like I'm with the IRS and I'm here to help you. So that's if anybody wants more detailed information, I can help you, or where to find that stuff, and give you some more details on what's going on with this. These are the new categories that they're going to be, they'll have categories under the new one contract, but it won't be all different contracts like it's been in the past. They'll also be changing some of the numbering systems that they use. Most contracts had a thing called a special item number, and this was for reporting purposes. So with my furniture contract, I probably had like 7 or 8 special item numbers under there, and one was for tables, and one was for chairs, and one was for workstations, and so on and so forth, file cabinets. So you had different subcategories under there. And there were thousands of these when you multiplied them across the different contracts that were out there. So they're going to be consolidating those into more general categories, and there's a thing called the NAICS code, North American Industry Classification System. So what used to be thousands of different subcategories is now going to be shrunk down to under 100, which I think is pretty impressive, and hopefully won't be too confusing to transition to. This is an important one. This is the Catalog Management Initiative, and this is something that Paula and I and BSA and Clover and Steve Noyes have been involved in for over 3 years now. And we've been meeting with the people up at GSA in New York. And the whole thing was to try and improve the content and what was going on with the government's GSA Advantage selling system, because you had a lot of people that were bad actors that were playing with the part numbers and the descriptions and doing things with the pricing that were illegitimate and causing a lot of problems, not only with the customer base, but with GSA in general, and with the legitimate suppliers who were being held accountable for why, their toner cartridge was for the OEM was $100, and there were people selling the same cartridge for $20. So anyhow, we've made quite a bit of progress up there over the last year. And this was when it was just a regional initiative that was being managed by the office products region there in New York. It's now an overall GSA initiative, and it's being managed by the offices in Philadelphia, which we also have a good relationship with there. And they actually asked us to put together a program for them, or not a program, but a white paper, if you will, talking about best practices and future aspirations that could be used in dealing with content and managing, internet resales and things like that. So one of the things that we did that's working quite well, and it may be a big pain or migraine for Paula, but on the BSA website, there's actually a section there that talks about where authorized resellers of imaging products are listed. So HP, Xerox, Lexmark, Clover have all put their list of authorized dealers on there. And GSA's contracting officers go right to that website if you submit products to be added to the GSA schedule to see if you're an authorized reseller or not. And if you're not on that list, you can't add those products. So that's been a good, I think, starting point. And toners were, a tough type of product to start doing that with. But I think we've made a lot of progress, and GSA is very appreciative of what we're doing. But I think that can be eventually rolled into other categories and other things that we're dealing with, similar types of problems. I think I've had conversations with people in here about shredders and other things like that, where there are illegitimate things just showing up on the internet, and they say they're selling my product at this price, but it's not. It's a counterfeit. It's a gray market. It's something like that. But we're working on ways to squeeze those things out of there. Has anybody here ever attended a GSA Expo? Okay, a couple hands there. Well, for about 15 years, GSA had a big national show. And it was a big event. They either had it in San Diego, San Antonio, or Orlando. And they would bring in 5,000 to 10,000 federal government employees, and they'd have a big training thing there where you could, take different classes to get your certifications up for your contracting officer status and so forth. And then they had a giant tabletop show that lasted 2 days, and you'd have, maybe 1,000, vendors in there who held GSA contracts, who would have an opportunity to interact with these contracting officers between their classes and other events. And it was a good event, and dealers and manufacturers and a lot of people participated. But GSA kind of screwed it up because one of their top executives got pictures taken when he was in a hot tub with a martini glass and something like that. So the whole thing blew up, and they started investigating how a lot of the money was being used for things that shouldn't be. So anyhow, there's been no GSA show for 5 or 6 years, 6 years. So anyhow, GSA has finally, got amnesia about that, and they've decided they're going to have a new show. So I'm just letting you know that if you have reps or dealers that are selling your product to the government, this is something you want to make sure that they know about, because it's going to be in April of next year in Atlanta, and it's a great opportunity to engage with federal government customers on a face-to-face basis. Also, I mentioned a little bit about our Advocacy Fly-In. This has been an event that we've been rebuilding the last couple years. We had about 75 people there this past year. It was held at the end of March. We were at a hotel about 5 blocks from Capitol Hill. We could walk to the House buildings and the Capitol for our meetings. We had a good cross-section of GSA contract holders, some of the better vendors around the country, our wholesale partners. We had furniture people there. We had manufacturers, and just a good collection of people that showed up to participate. Our agenda had some very good speakers. I mentioned earlier Stacey Mitchell was one of our marquee speakers, and she talked a lot about what's going on with Amazon. We had people there that were actually working on the Defense Authorization Bill for GSA, giving updates on that. We had people talking about the Consolidated Schedules program I just told you about, to let you know what to expect there. But these were all very timely and important topics that we discussed or had presented to us, and you had the opportunity to not only ask questions and all, but we also had a networking event, and those people stuck around afterwards so you could get some face time with them that way. We had a pretty cool networking and entertainment thing where we did a City of Lights bus tour, where we drove around after dark in a big Greyhound bus and stopped at multiple monuments around the city, and you could get out at the Pentagon or at the Iwo Jima Memorial or different places like that and take pictures. And we had some of that coffee that we were talking about at lunch today was on the bus as well, so it was a good time. And then what the evening or the event ended with was the next day, Paul Miller, our lobbyist, gets appointments with your congressmen and senators, so you'll have an opportunity to go in and sit down with one of them or their aides depending on what their availability is. And so we, give people some talking points. This particular year was about the Defense Authorization Bill. The message was presented effectively, and we ended up getting some real legislative activity as a result of that. But who knows what it's going to be by springtime next year? It'll be something else. And it's also an opportunity for you to talk about things that are just important to you in general as a business owner or a citizen or a taxpayer. So great opportunity to do that. So we hope that a lot of you will participate in that next year. We also had some sponsors. A lot of them are in this room, and I wanted to say thank you again for that. So it was a successful event, and you guys had a big part in that, so I appreciate it very much. And that's it. So I don't know how I am.
We have a little time for questions. Steve?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. It's important that everybody in this room recognize what Mike and Paula have done with the world's largest customer. And I think as we talked earlier today about our role and what direction this group, BSA and NOPA, is going on, we're not going to be all things to all people, but we want to be most things to most people. And the option of selling to the federal government is attractive, but you got to know how to do it. And Mike knows the road book and the playbook, and Paula has done a great job with Alice working with the federal government. And this page that they have, the website, if you've ever been to it, this is a big step. It's a strategic relationship between BSA and GSA that has resulted in a number of new visitors to our site. And I wonder if you could comment, how many people have you noticed a significant uptick?
I'll be honest, I haven't looked at the analytics.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm sure it's good.
Oh, it's been significant.
Yeah, and that gives us a unique impression, again, with the world's largest customer, and it shows great value that this association brings to the GSA. So I want to thank Mike and Paula and Alice Simpkins and Deb Dugas, too. I don't know if she's here. Deb has been terrific. There we go. Thank you, Deb. Yeah, Deb's been terrific as well. So please join me in thanking Mike and Paula for this. Really,
Pete? Yeah, I'm close.
Mike, do you have an update on prison industries?
That is a weird situation. It's probably been 8 or 10 years ago, our OFDA side of the association, and Paul Miller in particular, we had a lot of aligned members at that time. We had Steelcase, Herman Miller, Knoll, and so forth were members of the association. And we effectively lobbied against federal prison industry so that they were no longer a mandatory source for furniture in the federal government. Now, depending on the agents you go to, and especially with Department of Justice and the corrections system, they still are kind of mandatory there because that's an interagency thing, but technically they're not. They're only mandatory for consideration. They are not mandatory, a mandatory source. That's federal. That's totally separate from the state thing. The states, a lot of them have their own thing that they have tied in with their correction systems, and we don't have any influence, or probably not. And I know my state of Maryland, you're pretty much locked out of selling furniture to in there. So, wish I had better news.
Anybody else? Mike will be here tonight, so please feel free to grab him. Mike, we appreciate your advocacy
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
on
Appreciate
behalf
it.
of us.